Romeo and Juliet, Act 2.
Who are you? Are we enemies?
Mr. Yasui here. I saw Mrs. Yasui was making this video for her freshman, and I thought I would take it, steal it, edit it together, and give my own thoughts on Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet to help you as you start reading it on your own.
Let's get started and think about what we should have gotten out of our reading for this act in our play.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
We left off in Act 1 with Romeo and Juliet ending that party, ending their hand-holding and their mwah-mwah kisses together.
That's wonderful.
And then realizing, well, shoot, this person who I'm, absolutely in love with all of a sudden is, the one person in the entire world I can't be with.
That's horrible.
Which is kind of a bummer.
Act 2, Scene 1 goes into Romeo ditching his friends. So Mercutio and Benvolio leave the party with Romeo, and they are tempting Romeo back out of the shadows as he's trying to get to Juliet by talking about Rosalind's body parts to try to get Romeo to jump out of the woods, out of the orchard around Juliet's house and confront them. But he doesn't care anymore.
He jests at scars that never felt a wound.
Juliet is his entire world. He's not going anywhere until he makes sure that he can break into her house and find her under whatever means he has at his disposal.
Little known fact, Romeo invented parkour.
Arguably one of the most notable scenes in the entire play, Act 2, Scene 2, better known as the balcony scene, is when these two lovers actually confront their feelings for each other in a very real way. And I think the best place to start is with Juliet, who at this point is just sitting on her balcony, thinking she's alone.
What man art thou, that thus bescreened in night so stumblest on my counsel?
And talking about her problems. And really, this is the biggest one.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo. Wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet.
That's the problem. If it was just any guy, it's possible that Juliet could explain to her parents why she would prefer this person over Paris, especially if it was a person of wealth and means. But it's Romeo Montague. That's the problem. It's all about the names. And so this is her diary to herself talking about how, well, shoot, if we could just ditch names, this wouldn't be an issue.
So Juliet confesses her love. Romeo pops out of the bushes and surprises her. She's affronted at first, but then because it's Romeo, she just melts into his voice and they start talking. And as they talk, they realize they're both in love with one another after just this brief encounter. So we get this difficulty in that Romeo and Juliet are from these two feuding households, but they don't care about that. And so it's them trying to plan the future and worried about how quickly they're moving. Well, Juliet's worried about how quickly she's moving. Romeo seems to want to move right ahead as quickly as possible.
And it's worth noting that the balcony itself is a really powerful message, kind of like what we're doing right now. It's social distancing, isn't it?
Too soon. Too soon.
So the fact that there just so happened to be a balcony built into the theater was kind of a fun thing for Shakespeare, but it's also a really fun thing for us to think about when we are analyzing a story. Juliet is literally out of Romeo's reach.
Swear by thy gracious self, which is the god of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee.
If my heart's dear love, that
The movies actually have a lot more physical interaction than the play. Yeah, this one and the other version even more so. Yeah, so this out of the reach element is in the play, but not so much in the movie.
Oh, wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied?
And he needs to find a way to get past that. And the only way he can do that is by seeking her hand in marriage.
3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed.
If thy bent of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world.
We also get this romantic dialogue between Romeo and Juliet after Juliet proposes marriage to Romeo for the next day, day 2, after knowing each other for a few minutes. And then if you're in the movie version, making out for a little bit. But if you're in the play, just talking for a little while. So Juliet puts the plan out there for them to get married the next day, and then the nurse calls her into the house. And then we get this little bit of back and forth. This dialogue reminds me of something. What is it? I know.
No, you hang up. No, you... Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Well, you didn't hang up either. She didn't hang up.
People haven't changed a lot in the last 500 years as we move now into the next scene.
So Romeo needs help, and this is where we are introduced to a brand new character we've not met yet, but who has an incredibly important role in our story. Act 2, Scene 3 is all about Romeo seeking the help of Friar Laurence.
Friar Laurence!
You can see here that Friar Laurence and Romeo have a really close relationship. He's a friar, so he's a religious person. He's the one that Romeo is seeking to get he and Juliet married, and as this movie shows, they're really close, and he's aware of kind of Romeo's attitudes towards women at this point in the film.
So the fact that Romeo's knocking on his door saying, "Hey man, can you get me married to this completely other person today?" Has Friar Laurence a little bit in a tizzy. Probably one of my most favorite lines in our story.
Holy St. Francis! Is Rosaline, that thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken?
Thou dost not mark me, father.
Oh, young men's love then lies not truly in the hearts, but in the rights.
Hear me.
So Friar Laurence agrees to marry Romeo and Juliet, not so much because he thinks that they're actually in love. He knows Romeo enough that this kind of flighty nature of him is there, but the fact that it will get the feuding households to be together. And this quote does a good job of kind of summing that up.
This alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love.
Let us hence.
Romeo is thrilled. He doesn't care what Friar Laurence thinks. All he hears is like, "Yeah, get married today." So we come upon Scene 4. And this scene is actually trying to do 2 different things. So let's start with the first thing that it's doing, which is bringing us back to Romeo's friends, Mercutio and his cousin Benvolio. They're still feeling kind of sore, especially Mercutio, about essentially being ditched last night by Romeo. But there is Romeo. He comes skipping down the pathway, and he looks happy for the first time in a long time. And Mercutio... instead of deciding to hang on to some grudge that, "Hey man, you ditched us and I'm going to be really mad about it for a while," brushes that aside, sees how happy his friend is, and says,
Why, is not this better now than groaning for love? Now art thou sociable. Now art thou Romeo. Now art thou what thou art, by art as well as by nature.
basically, this is so much better than like the mopey, heartsick Romeo that we were seeing. This is a Romeo I'd want to hang out with. This feels like the real Romeo here.
The other important things that happen in this act are we get Tybalt, who, remember from the party scene, knows that Romeo was there, knows that he crashed the party, and is really upset by it. He challenges Romeo, but nobody knows where Romeo is because they weren't expecting him to be with Juliet all night. And so he challenges Romeo, and Mercutio and Benvolio are arguing whether Romeo will respond to the challenge. Will he fight Tybalt? We get this sense that Tybalt is this great fighter, and that Mercutio knows quite a bit about fighting. He knows some of the terms, the ambuscados, the rapier terms, and Benvolio doesn't. So we get that Mercutio is a pretty good swords fighter, and he thinks Tybalt is a great sword fighter. And so we have this tension that's going to be building soon, because we know from the prologue that these people are going to be dying. And so we're just waiting for that with that dramatic irony that's kind of sitting on us right now. We also get a little scene with the nurse and Romeo, and so the nurse is kind of defending Juliet and wanting to make sure that Romeo is treating her well, and then Romeo gives her the news that the friar will marry them.
Act 2, Scene 5. We start with Juliet waiting for the nurse. Remember, she hasn't seen Romeo since the middle of last night when she figured out who he was, met him, learned his name, and then agreed to marry him, like within the span of an hour.
My ears have not yet drunk 100 words of that tongue's utterance.
So you can imagine that when many hours have passed, she's getting a little anxious because this has been a really fast-paced romance so far.
Mrs. Yasui likes that kind of petulant Juliet line that's up there on the screen. I really prefer that power dynamic that she's going to talk about here in a second, where it's the nurse having control for the first time over Juliet.
Have you ever, had this really crazy, awesome piece of information and you knew other people wanted to have it, and so you just sort of tease them with it? You kind of dangle it in front of them just to see how worked up they're going to get? Shakespeare does something great here. He shows how a lowly servant, like the nurse, can have a total reversal in power dynamic over her employer / higher class citizen when she holds this information away from Juliet.
What says he of our marriage? What of that?
Oh, Lord, how my head aches. What a head have I.
Now that the nurse has this control, she's going to kind of weasel as much as she can out of Juliet, whether that's a back rub or some nice words or some praise. She's going to get all she can out of this moment where she has the upper hand.
Because typically, Juliet is the power in this relationship. I know she's just a kid, but honestly, when it comes down to it, Juliet is the high-class society lady, and the nurse is just a servant. But now, the nurse has a juicy secret, and Juliet needs it.
Sweet, sweet, sweet nurse, tell me, what says my love?
Juliet eventually figures out that Romeo has sent a message for her to meet, for them to wed that afternoon.
And hie you haste to Father Laurence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife.
But here's a line that I will come back to often in talking about this story and in talking about what we think Romeo and Juliet are experiencing for each other. Are they experiencing real, true love? Or is it something else? Is it something more akin to lust? Friar Laurence, in his vows for them, says,
"These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die, like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness. Therefore, love moderately. Romeo shall thank thee, daughter, for us both."
Your relationship started like lightning.
It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens.
Love moderately, right? To be moderate means to pace things out. It doesn't mean to go slow, but it just means to be smart about it. And that's what Friar Laurence is hoping they can sort of switch to. Let's just take a chill pill and take it easy from here on out. So here's where we're at. We have a lot that's happened in our story. We're only literally halfway through day 2.
And as we move on now, we are just beginning day 2. We have a couple of things that are kind of in the back of our minds. We have Tybalt's challenge. We have this feud that's been going on, the secret marriage that not many people know about. And so how are the families going to react to this news? The friar has hopes, but we know from the beginning that those hopes are for naught in this play. So how are things going to happen? So that's my question to you before you start reading Act 3. All right. Enjoy. We will hopefully come up with another one of these videos for Act 3 next week. And yeah, keep reading, keep trying. I'm going to put some links on for some audio versions of the play. But yeah, do your best you can to get through the play, get through the story, and then we'll add some more things on Steady Sync. Have a good day.